Urbanization refers to the increasing number of people living in an area. It predominantly results in the physical growth of urban areas.
What were some negative effects of urbanization back in the 18 to 1900s? In this video, I will be explaining some of the most common negative effects of urbanization from that time period. Negative effects of urbanization in New York City were unsanitary places, dangerous buildings, and trash-filled streets. Most of the houses in New York City were occupied by 2 to 3 families depending on the size of the tenement. Also, the stairwells were not constructed very well. They were poorly made, they were very unstable, and they were a very hazardous part of the tenements. Another problem with the tenements is the sanitation. They were occupied by multiple families and were very small. They did not have any type of working water, so these people went on for weeks without taking a shower, washing their hands. Also, they had to go all the way outside to use an outhouse, and their body fluid went right out into the streets of New York City. A man named Jacob Riis was one man that truly showed us how living in New York City was back in the 18 to 1900s. He would go into the tenements in the city and take a whole variety of photos that showed us how dirty, unsanitary, and dangerous these buildings were. Jacob Riis argued that all the housing needed to be in better condition, that there needed to be better lighting and sanitation for the houses, and that the city needed parks and playgrounds so that kids had something interesting and entertaining to do instead of sitting in the trash-filled streets in New York City. This man is one of the reasons that urbanization went from terrible to excellent.
Although there were many negative effects happening due to urbanization, there were also positive effects that came from it. These included new technologies such as sewage and water systems, lighting, elevators, and other inventions in this time period. Another positive effect of urbanization were cultural benefits. A few examples of these benefits were things such as museums, theaters, parks, and education systems. Going back to Jacob Riis, he had showed the negative impacts of urbanization, but through those negative things he argued and fought for better housing, good lighting, sanitation, and things to help his community. By Riis being a reporter and taking the photographs of the poor living conditions, he showed others the changes that needed to be made in places where the people weren't as fortunate. Another important person from the urbanization time was George Waring. Waring was an engineer along with being a Civil War veteran. He was to design a new sewage draining system for the city. Along with him creating these implements, he helped clean the streets of the city and get rid of the waste contaminating them. He was only head of the Department of Sanitation for 3 years, but he made a great impact on people of the city and more fitting environment to live in as an adult or a child. After these people came along to help change sanitation in the city, things such as model tenement buildings came into place. There were few, but as time passed, the tenement buildings would eventually solve problems with living conditions. These buildings were built with bathtubs, sinks, and plenty of space. These are all things to keep up with a healthy and comfortable lifestyle. Within a few years, they multiplied throughout the city and the conditions for living were getting better.
The Protestant Puritan work ethic is a concept in theology, sociology, economics, and history which emphasizes that hard work and frugality are a result of a person's salvation. It was an important force behind the unplanned and uncoordinated emergence of modern capitalism. This idea is also known as the Protestant ethic thesis. The Protestant work ethic is often credited with helping to define the societies of North Europe and other countries where Protestantism was common. There was a book written by Max Weber, a German sociologist, economist, and politician, called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. It began as a series of essays. The original was composed, then the translated one came after. Weber wrote that capitalism in Northern Europe evolved when the Protestant ethic influenced large numbers of people to engage in work in the secular world. The book argues that Puritan ethics and ideas he influenced the development of capitalism. Weber defines the spirit of capitalism as the ideas and a spirit that favored the rational pursuit of economic gain. After defining the spirit of capitalism, he argues that there's many reasons to find its origins in the religious ideas of the Reformation. Weber showed that certain branches of Protestantism have supported activities that have to do with economic gain. He argues that following the new Protestant religions were forced to follow a secular vocation with as much enthusiasm as people, and a person who was living accordingly to that worldview was most likely to make money. He also argued that the new religions forbid wasting hard-earned money on luxuries because it was a sin. Donations were limited to churches due by certain Protestant sects of icons. Donation of money to the poor and charities were also forbidden because then they would beg for more. The social condition was described as laziness, burdening their men, and as insult to God by not working. Social Darwinism is a name given to many theories of society that came out in UK, US, and Europe in the 1870s. Economically, it means the strong should see their wealth and power increase while the weak should see their wealth and power decrease. There's different social Darwinists, and they all have different views of which group is which. The term was well known in the United States in 1994 by an American historian named Richard. He used it in the ideological was effect against fascism to denote a reactionary creed that promoted competitive strife, racism, and chauvinism. He then noticed the influence of Darwinists and other involuntary ideas above those with collectivism views, enough to come up with a term for phenomenon, Darwinist collectivism. The social Darwinism had barely been used by supporters of the supposed ideologies of ideas. Instead, it has almost always been used by opponents. The term persuades upon the common use of the term Darwinism, and it has been used to describe a range of involuntary views. Then, in the 19th century, was more directed to natural selection, as first led by Charles Darwin to explain speciation in populations of organisms. While the term has claimed that Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection can be used to understand the social endurance of the nation or country, social Darwinism commonly refers to ideas that introduce Darwin's publication of The Origin of Species.